So, what I want to talk through is just some of, why Drupal in higher education. And Drupal is remarkably widely adopted among universities. So from small private schools, large state institutions, everybody in between, a huge percentage of those are actually using Drupal. And one of the reasons we found why is you look at a university website and you look at all of the audiences that they have to speak to. And we've worked with commercial groups and folks who have different types of customers or profiles of customers. A university audience is probably one of the most complex setups that anybody has to work with. So when you have prospective students, current students, faculty, staff, the community, the media, alumni, all of these are different constituencies that need to be communicated with via the web in some way. When you have a university that has healthcare or a college of medicine presence as well as academic medical centers, they have all of these same ones, including patients, future patients, doctors, and so you have a remarkably complex set of audiences that need to be addressed. And at the same time, you have so many different stories to tell. So not only do we need to communicate to these different types of people, the groups doing that communication are very, very different as well. So the College of Art has to communicate to its prospective students, its current students, its faculty, its alumni differently than the College of Engineering. There's different expectations around how that communication happens, what the experience is like for the users, what sort of information is conveyed. And so realistically, higher education probably has one of the most difficult web challenges of any type of organization that we encounter. The only commercial groups we can really compare it to are groups like Pfizer, who has hundreds of thousands of websites globally addressing these audiences. Johnson & Johnson, the same type of thing. Even like a Warner Music, where it's 400 or 500 different artist sites that all have to be very, very different. Those are the only types of commercial clients who are dealing with as big a challenge as there is in higher education. And what we've seen is that for the most part, especially depending if there's legacy systems there, a lot of the higher education digital sites are relatively brochureware. So they're relatively flat, they're just a collection of pages. A lot of times those pages are built out there, they're left online, they're never updated, and so it's really hard to dynamically address all these audiences. And you think about one of the other challenges that a university faces, a huge slice of their most important audience, prospective students, also is probably going to have some of the highest expectations for how the web is presented to them. They're going to compare every university website to the experience they have on the brand sites they visit, the different stores that they look at, different places they look to go on vacation or go for the weekend. The expectations from those users are very, very high. And so, not only do universities have to speak to all these different audiences, tell all these different stories, they also have some of the users with highest expectations around how digital should feel and should work. All of that, of course, constrained by much leaner budgets, much leaner teams who are asked to do that work. So the reason that I think we've seen Drupal so widely adopted in higher education is because it's sort of uniquely suited to tell those different stories and empower broader groups within the university to actually use the web and manipulate the web as a communication tool for those different audiences. So I wanted to talk real quickly through Clark University. Clark University had a very, very typical university website. And those of you earlier today saw a little bit of this. But prior it was very, very standard. There was a header image, some really basic content, tons of just very, very straightforward pages that had an image on them. They were a block of text. They had something like 50,000 of those out there. that were just built and sitting out as pages. None were really updated, none were really used. There weren't a lot of analytics. I remember one of the first meetings we had with them before they had some new marketing folks come in, we talked about, okay, they wanted to spend all this money on a redesign of the website. That's great. 6 months from now, how are you going to determine if that was money well spent, if that project was successful? And the room actually went silent. And then we came back and said, okay, well, what sorts of things are you tracking now? And at the time, they really weren't even looking at the analytics for their site. And so they didn't know how well they were performing and weren't really thinking about, you know, how they should even be looking at, okay, well, we're going to redesign the site, why? But you push that forward, and they had an agency come in and help them. They were able to actually do a really strong partnership between marketing and IT, which was big on them. And they fundamentally changed the way that web worked at Clark University. And they immediately took the homepage and thought about, you know, this main page, instead of devoting real estate to all these different audiences, the homepage we want to speak specifically to prospective students. And that was a pretty substantial political battle just to make that distinction. There were some things they were able to do with the platform for people that were already on campus, shifting them to different sites and other things. But just that one philosophical point, once they pushed it through, really opened up and really focused what they were doing on the site. They built that My Journey component, which was really meant to help lead people through the site. One of the challenges they had, and they talked about, is their previous site, if you took the navigation, so you took how the site was laid out and what menu items there were, they said you basically could have laid it down on a map of the campus and every building had its own top menu link. So they had built this navigation structure and this user experience, not for somebody stepping there and trying to figure out, what does this person want to see, how do I get them to that, but instead the website was organized like their university itself was. And so just that change in perspective and thinking about, you know, let's not make sure everybody has their button, let's think about how to get these people to the right places was huge for them. You know, the other thing, of course, and this is, you know, typical, a huge draw, is they had seen a tremendous uptick in the mobile visits to their site. They were very well aware that the, you know, first visit, that the first real experience anyone was getting for Clark University was the website, and not just the website, it was probably on their phone. And so they spent a lot of time thinking about how this experience was going to work on a mobile device. Again, huge. And so that's something that, you know, again, people look at Drupal and think, okay, how can I do this? And you look at Drupal, the tools, and we kind of talked about these earlier, it gives you the abilities to distribute a lot of that content authoring and a lot of that page building, but still to do that from central teams and with people who can, you know, make the decisions around how the sites are going to look, how they're going to work. And, you know, the biggest way I've seen people frame the distinction, or at least the most impactful way, is, okay, if we've got a partnership between IT and marketing, or IT and departmental stakeholders, you know, IT can come in and they're going to put together a framework that allows for that communication that is really meant to enable people within the university, not just IT, to actually put content out on the site and tell the story. And that has not always typically been the case, and it's something that a lot of people look at that and we start having this conversation and we have to tell them, you know, it's not just a technology problem. The technology is important and the technology needs to be able to be usable and easy to use. It is also something that you have to be able to train, to support, to enable those users as well. Not everybody thinks of that. But when it's done, and when it's done well, you know, you actually can make it easier and easier for the users to contribute content. So this was the site that I showed you guys. And I broke this down a little bit so that you think about day to day, what does somebody at the Department of Biology, what am I asking them to actually do to create this site and allow it to be custom? And from a platform perspective, from an administrator perspective, I really just want them to give me a picture that's going to be distinctive for their site. I want them to fill in some specific areas of content, but then in terms of how that page looks, how it's presented, different stories that are brought in, I can handle that from a platform perspective. And for a lot of departments, this is exactly what they need. What's great though about Drupal is I can give them this, and this may work for 80% of the departments that really just need to have a little bit of distinctiveness, need to have a little bit of their content separated. But with Drupal, I can enable the departments that have more capabilities, more sophistication, to have more and more control over how their sites look. But I'm able to decide what those thresholds are, who's prepared for that, and how that works within the organization. And that's important because it's something that you want there to be enough flexibility that people don't feel like they need to use another system. You can never tie them so tightly that they leave. But at the same time, you can set it up where, depending on the audiences and the people, you don't have to give them so much rope that they hang themselves. Drupal lets you strike that balance. And it lets you strike that balance differently depending on the different groups that you're having to serve. And you look at, when you come to this, okay, so I'm making it easier on the people to edit specific areas. I'm making this much easier to govern because I'm actually restricting how crazy they can get with this website. I'm locking them into specific types of content. I can actually enforce structural rules on that content that helps me ensure accessibility. It also means that if I've had my site and people come in, they've filled out all this department content, and then a year later, a new president comes in, and every time a new president comes in, the entire site needs to be redesigned. It is like a fundamental law of higher education that I've seen. Within Drupal, and Nate showed some of this in his session, how quickly you can change the theme. Once all the content's there, if a new theme needs to be applied to it, that doesn't mean you need to go back to every single department and say, okay guys, you have to re-put all your stuff into this new theme. Instead, the new theme can pull the pieces of content and display them appropriately. And then you think about, okay, well now they've got all that content, here are other things that I can do. So I have a list of all the courses that are part of individual programs, or I have programs that somebody else might consider faculty profiles. These are things that I can automatically add to the page, or I can automatically make available as assets for the people to pull into their page. You think about them as really these atomic pieces of content. So rather than having anybody have to build a web page for a particular program, we're really thinking about little blocks of content that are assembled into the actual page itself. And the reason that matters is because more and more, those little blocks of content shouldn't have to live in isolation. Like I've walked into so many different universities who have been using legacy CMSs who will have to modify something on the front page of their program to align. If they want to add a new picture to a link, they have to change it in 3 different places to make it consistent. The ability to kind of take content and make it more like these little atoms that I can use means that if I have something I want to put on the home page and my department page and somewhere else, I can actually pick that one piece of content and reuse it to all those different places. And you look at that situation, and I talk about this a lot, it's one thing to have a website problem and to have a website that needs to be constructed. Because of all those audiences, because of all the different departments and everything else, universities have 100 and sometimes thousands of website problems. And so it becomes that much more important to be able to go and effectively use the content that's being created for all those websites, to be able to keep track of it, to be able to use it in the different places that it belongs, because that scale and scope, it's really unlike any other organization having to deal with. And increasingly, and the other thing that we've seen is it's not even just a web problem. So you look at some of the things that the University of Iowa in particular has been able to do. They run all of their digital signage on Drupal. So it's tied into the same content authoring, the same system that the website content is running. They have a mobile app that is fed content from the website system, and it's integrated via the API. They're able to export content. They have an online version of the newsletter that can actually export the content into a system that fits into their email management program. And so rather than then having all these different silos of content, they're able to use Drupal to feed not just the web, but to feed their applications, their signage, their email. So having little pieces of content that can show up in different places on the site is great. It also means they can show up on different devices as well. So some of the things that people do with this. Again, this is a couple sites from the University of Minnesota, and there's a case study I can send around for UMN specifically. They launched a website platform that was self-service for their university, so it had 2 levels of service, one where the central team was coming in and customizing, another one where anybody could come in, get a website with the basic theme and fill out the content and be done, and it was centrally managed. They launched the self-service portion in December 15th of last year. By the end of January of this year, they had 200 sites that had moved into it. Between the 2 pieces now, and it's been a 2-year project overall, they've had just under 500 sites moved to the platform. And these sites now all have consistent branding. The sites don't even necessarily look the same. So, this is the College of Biological Sciences. They had an agency come in, design a very specific site for how they wanted to communicate with their audience. It's very different from the College of Science and Engineering that has their own breakdown, their own way of their presenting this. These are running on the same piece of Drupal code, essentially. They are running on the same platform. But that platform was configured in such a way to allow these departments the freedom to really customize what they're doing, but they don't have to worry about the security of that platform. They don't have to worry about handling the updates because those are handled centrally. They don't have to worry about SSO integrations or any of that. They just have to worry about the story they're telling and how it's being told. And this has been really important to the university as well, as they're looking at engaging some of the agencies and some of the other groups that build these sites. Rather than starting the conversation with, hey, build me a website, they actually have guidelines now that say, it's great, I want you to build me a website. This is all we have out of the gate. We already have the platform in place, we already have integration with our single sign-on, we already have integration with our CRM. We just need you to focus on the design of the site. And it's actually allowed the departments to better spend and more effectively spend their money because they can focus the agencies on the things that actually have impact rather than have every single group that buys a website to pay somebody to set up WordPress or to set up Drupal again and again and again. And not a university, but one of my favorite examples of this, SAB Miller, Miller Beer and all of those, probably has one of the most sophisticated web development standards and governance that we've seen somebody put in place, where they actually have a guide that they present to all their brand managers and to the agencies that they work with. It's got the typical RACI matrix of responsibilities where they go and say, that's great, you want to work with us, you want to build this great site, here's the rules of engagement to do that. Now, a couple other things come from this. You talk about how many sites there are. These are some of the ones that aren't the fully custom ones. So, one of the big benefits of this to the University of Minnesota has been their faculty sites and their labs. And I know that's a big part of Alan's work here and some of the other things that have been done. It's the ability for all these groups that maybe have a grant requirement to put their information on the web, have a website. Now they can do that very, very quickly. And so they have those sites spun up. We've seen Harvard do the same thing where they're able to go in and have their professors come in, very quickly go build a site, who they are, what their CV looks like, where they're showing up in the news. I'm going to tell too much of this story, but one of the better implementations of this was at the University of Phoenix School of Advanced Studies. So the University of Phoenix group that awards advanced degrees. They got on the wrong side of a regulatory body who questioned if their faculty were in fact good enough and doing enough research to be able to be accredited to provide those degrees. And they suddenly realized that they had no way to track what the faculty were actually doing, to pull together these reports that the commission was asking for. And then they started to think, and man, anybody who would actually consider us for this is probably going to have the same concern. How do we show off our faculty? So they actually, built a pretty robust faculty directory that became mandatory for people to come and fill out. But it linked all their faculty, where they were teaching, their different roles, different groups that they were in, the courses that they were connected to, their areas of research, their publications, their presentations, all their different activity. And so this one became a really powerful tool to go out with from a publicity perspective. They also used it to go and pull the reports, to go and put in somebody's hand and say, this is the faculty that we have as part of this program. This is actually entirely Drupal. So they didn't have any of this prior. So they didn't even have like a, some people like the Harvard setup, they have some of this, and Stanford has one where they've got an ERP system that knows a little bit about the faculty. And so they can actually have you log in with your ID and it'll create a page for you and fill out your name and then ask you to fill out the rest. They didn't even have that to integrate with. I've seen some people do some really cool stuff with this. So this is the Millikan University website. One of my favorite things, so they had people going out and building all of these different pages for their different programs, and then they actually used that to build this really great program browser for the system. So I can go and say, I'm interested in art and design, and what it'll do is it'll take all the different programs that match those criteria and let me sort through them. And so it's this really visual, really dynamic way of showing prospective students all these different things that they might be interested in based on their interest. And again, the only reason this is possible is because these different programs, again, are these atomic pieces of Drupal content. So the digital marketing program, the interest that it's associated with, the courses, the imagery, all that detail, somebody's filled out for each individual program, and then it just automatically pulls into this display. So it's just the type of things that, again, once you have this content in a way that you can easily manipulate, it allows you to do. Any questions on any of that? A couple of the other pieces of this, just want to be cognizant of time. So this is some of Iowa's digital signage. Again, it's something that they put in place and worked really hard on. They're spending all this time training different groups to use Drupal. So they had a site now service very similar to University of Minnesota's, where you could go and get a standard site, or you could work with a group to have a custom site built for you. As part of this, they're like, wow, we're doing all this training on a particular interface. They started looking at the costs of signage and different signage providers, and they're like, well, why don't we just double down on that and put a solution in place to actually run the signage on campus from the same platform. And then the last thing that I think is pretty interesting, and we've seen more and more of, I don't have an actual login to these because I'm not a student at either institution. We've seen a lot of people building out their portals within Drupal. So this is Kent State's portal. Probably one of, and these are something where this is Drupal, this is really integrated tightly with Banner in their case. But a couple of things that they've done particularly with it, is they have this dynamic student checklist. And what that actually does, you guys hear me? Nope. Did it die out? No, it didn't die. I think it just, somehow it has to feed both of these. But that dynamic student checklist will actually go through and it will look at where a student is in completing their enrollment for the upcoming semester. And every time they log into the portal, give them a to-do list of what they have left to do. And it's constantly checking that, you know, at the same time. I'm just gonna hold this thing, hopefully it'll work. What their big driving factor was, anything that you just wanted to see. So if it was content that you just needed to see or information you just wanted to see, they wanted to pull that and surface it in the portal. If it was something that you needed to do, realistically they didn't want to rebuild the system for you, and that's where they'll kick you off to the system itself. And we've seen this at the College of Southern Nevada. They're actually getting ready. This is their mock-up, or at least their interactive prototype for the portal. It's integrated with their file system. It's integrated with a lot of their other systems. Some of these are just links. Some of these are deep links to different areas. But we're starting to see people realize that the same things, the same patterns and the same way they're engaging with students on the front-facing website, they want to do once students are actually students and start presenting the same content. And there are enough areas where it might be nice to have a calendar that both people can see, that suddenly you have content that might go both places. And Drupal is smart enough as well, when somebody hits the site from a campus IP, and we've seen this so many times where, you know, they think, well, you know, some percentage of our traffic comes to the homepage, and we actually train them just to go and click my whatever the university is. You know, how much better is it to go ahead and take them there by default, make sure it's where they want to be, but start them in the place you're trying to make them go towards. But those are probably the biggest. You know, people do everything from emergency management sites to getting the faculty profiles, to the portals, to the signage. Iowa, one of the great features of their actual app that they have is you can even see like when the washers in your dorm, they were able to integrate with that system, so you can see when your laundry's done, you can see when the bus is coming. Drupal's not necessarily doing all that work, but it's the point where all that work is coming together and being presented to the user. That's about all I have. I mean, outside of, there's some other, this is not, the only other ones that I wasn't sure because the audience was a little mixed prior, but we've seen the government of Australia started doing the same type of initiative, going through and actually putting in a system in place that all of their different groups can use. Accessibility still applies, you know, making sure that security is top of mind to them. We've seen a lot of it at the state and local level as well. So City of LA just rolled out a platform. My home state, Oklahoma, is actually moving all of their sites to Drupal. But again, it's those same types of things. There's so many different types of sites, types of audiences, and Drupal's really, really good at being a chameleon and being flexible enough to go and say, you know what, this site needs a different set of modules, it can have that. But it can do that in a way that when there's a big security update, we still only need to apply that one time to all of our sites. And it's just, I think it's going to continue to be something that comes up, and then I'll tell you a couple of other stories. UCLA. UCLA is probably the wildest Wild West of the web that there has ever been. They're in the fortunate position of, I think, having enough money that they don't always have to make sound decisions. They had a major hacking incident that was in the news related to their healthcare system. And so they had a huge emphasis on wow guys, this was bad, it's going to cost us millions of dollars, let's start thinking about security. Less than a month later, they had a tiny little site that was built on WordPress, wasn't up to date, it was on some campus infrastructure. It got hacked. The hacker got access to the machine itself and got access to the machine in that little cluster. And within that current environment, that was a terrible thing. On its own, it was bad. In that environment, it was terrible. Their CISO, their chief security officer, actually came in and said they were going to have cost recovery and they were going to put this platform in place. He said, anybody who will move to this in the next 2 years, I will pay to make sure they get into it and they get their updates. And anybody who doesn't, I want to make sure that they submit to me a plan about how they're going to keep their updates. Now I think it's things like the accessibility pressure, the branding pressure. You know, at the end of the day, there's so many individual departments when there's not solutions like this that have a really hard time keeping up, because that's so much to ask such a small team to do. And I've yet to run into a higher education team that feels like they have more people than they know what to do with. It just doesn't exist. But so the more capabilities you can give to them without incurring like this burden just to keep the lights on, I think they can do more, and Drupal's just particularly good at doing that. That's all I have. Questions? Is everybody from a university here? Well, it's definitely, universities probably have it hardest. You have it about the next level. And then you've got the added pressure of a lot of your sites also have to do things. So they're not just brochureware, it's, wow, this needs to perform a transaction, or this needs to actually have some utility to it, or this needs to have an internal integrator, or a different application integrated.
One of the things that federal programs want to do, they have these directories of like lead contractors, radon contractors, communication contractors, and it's all contact information.
Yep.
And they want to bring this so that it just flows right into the application or for a certain region. Or we can do it somewhat with the GIS map.
Right.
But I was wondering if you know how to use it.
So somebody that's pulled in a vendor direct, like a contractor directory,
Well, we have the name.
you have the names, they just
Yes.
need to be
So now
presented in
The
Drupal.
programs are blocking in the names, typing in the name of the contractor,
Right.
their street, and the counties they serve.
No, but I promised Alan to find an example very, very similar to that. So I'll look. I mean, that is a use case that is such a straightforward content type in Drupal. And then Drupal is really, really good at pulling information from another system if it can connect. And then you can do really interesting things like only show those to specific people or have them organized by specific contracts or specific areas. I'm trying to think if there's a good, you guys, I mean, we do that. This is the closest I can think to come up with on short notice. But so Acquia works with something like 700 or 800 different agencies that do different things. And so we actually put this finder in place for our customers because we do support and enablement and the cloud platform for Drupal. We don't build stuff. But what this allows you to do is go through and look through our entire partner directory based on where they are and their specific capabilities, because that's what we kind of see as sometimes partners are focused on design or implementation. These facets of this search, these little filters, are just attributes that are tied to a single partner. And so when you think about building out, what a partner profile is on the site, and you think about the same thing for a contractor, any of these little attributes that you can make as part of that content type are things that you can potentially search and filter the site by. I have a really bad joke about performance spelled with an O, but I'm just talking about it, making it come on, search. I know it didn't actually give me the recommendation. We also do this on our resources as well, so this is actually using, it's Drupal tied in with Solr, which is a search technology. Comes with Acquia Cloud if you have Acquia Cloud. But what it allows you to do is go take any of that content and really easily build filters in different ways to search it by, any of those attributes you make. So it's right up there with faculty profiles. Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to see in Drupal or anything?